I still remember the sound of the silverware that night, the way the forks clinked against porcelain plates, the hum of low conversation, the muted laughter echoing off the restaurant's high ceilings. It wasn't supposed to be a dramatic evening. It wasn't supposed to be memorable at all. It was just a family dinner. At least, that's what I told myself when I agreed to go. We were seated at a long table near the back, the kind meant for large parties. My parents at the head, my brothers and sisters scattered in their usual clusters. I slid into my seat quietly, the way I always did. I never tried to claim space in these gatherings. I learned a long time ago that space wasn't something given to me easily. For the first hour, nothing was out of the ordinary. My brother cracked his jokes, the ones that always made my father laugh too hard, while my mother dabbed her lips with her napkin and tried to look refined. My sisters leaned toward each other, whispering and snickering behind cupped hands. I was used to it, the invisible line that always separated me from the rest of them, but I wasn't prepared for what happened when the entrees arrived. It started with a comment, so casual. "So sharp, why don't you go find another table?" The voice cut through the laughter like glass breaking. I looked up, and it was my brother, his eyes fixed on me, his smirk curling like smoke. For a moment, I didn't understand. He gestured lazily at the empty booths along the wall. "You don't really belong here. Not at this table." A few forks froze halfway to mouths. A couple of my sisters stifled their giggles. And my father, he cleared his throat as if to intervene, but didn't. I felt the words like a slap across the face. Not because they were new, but because he said them so loudly, with no hesitation, in front of strangers sitting just a few feet away. My stomach twisted. I tried to swallow, but the air had thickened. I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, the waiter came. He was holding a black folder, the kind restaurants use for checks. He walked right past my father, right past my brother, and placed it directly in front of me. "Here you are," he said, as if nothing was strange. I frowned. "Excuse me, what is this?" But my brother was already laughing. "Bill's yours tonight. You don't get to eat for free if you're not family." His words dripped with triumph. I glanced down at the slip of paper inside the folder. The number glared back at me. 3,270. For a second, I thought I had read it wrong. I blinked. The numbers didn't change. The drinks, the appetizers, the expensive bottles of wine my siblings ordered. Every last item was tallied under my name. My heart began to pound. I felt every eye at the table on me, watching, waiting. Even the waiter lingered, awkwardly shifting his weight, as if he wasn't sure whether to leave or stay. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to scream. But I did neither. Instead, I just stared at the paper, my breath shallow, my throat burning. The laughter around me swelled again. My sisters leaned into each other, whispering something I couldn't catch. My father pretended to check his phone. My mother raised her wine glass to her lips like she couldn't see me drowning. And my brother? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, grin wide. "That's what happens when you crash our family dinner," he said. "You pay." For a moment, time stretched thin. I could hear the clink of ice in someone's glass, the faint hiss of a bus braking outside the window, the blood roaring in my ears. I realized I was gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles had gone white. I could have shouted. I could have flipped the table, stormed out, demanded justice right then and there. But I didn't. I just sat there, silent, my mind racing. And then, slowly, carefully, I lifted my eyes from the bill to meet my brother's. He was still smirking, still so sure of himself. But something inside me shifted. I knew in that moment I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. So I let the silence stretch longer. Long enough that he leaned forward, eyebrows raised, as if impatient for me to explode. Instead, I drew in one steady breath, and when I finally spoke, I said only one sentence, and it changed everything. People often think betrayal comes out of nowhere, that it's a single cruel act, shocking, unexpected, impossible to see coming. But the truth is, it rarely is. What happened that night at the restaurant wasn't sudden. It was the final page in a story that had been written slowly, quietly, over the course of my life, because I wasn't born into that family. I was adopted. My parents never let me forget it. Not with words, but with the little things. The kind of things people can deny later, shrugging and saying, "You're imagining it." But I wasn't imagining it. I knew from the beginning that I wasn't like the others. At Christmas, my siblings would tear into large boxes with shiny electronics, expensive coats, the newest gadgets. My gifts were always smaller: a book, a sweater one size too big, sometimes a gift card. I remember holding them in my lap while everyone else compared their new toys, and pretending I didn't notice the difference. When family photos were taken, I was placed at the end of the line, not in the middle, not close to anyone, always on the edge, like an afterthought. One summer, when I was about 10, I overheard my aunt whispering to my mother in the kitchen. She thought I couldn't hear, but her voice carried. "She's sweet, but she's not really one of yours. Not one of yours." I don't think my mother meant for me to hear her quiet reply. "Well, we do what we can." But blood is blood. That sentence carved itself into me. Blood is blood. And from then on, I started to see the pattern everywhere. When I got good grades, it was expected, nothing to praise. When my brother passed his classes by the skin of his teeth, it was a celebration. When I tried out for sports, they told me to focus on my studies. When my sisters failed at theirs, they got comfort, encouragement, a gentle pat on the back. I learned to survive by making myself small, by never demanding too much attention, never asking for more than I was given. But there was one person who never let me forget exactly where I stood. My brother. From childhood, he treated me like an outsider. When we played board games, he'd accidentally leave me out. When we shared chores, he'd shove the hardest jobs onto me, laughing about how I should be grateful to even be here. Once, when I was 12, he looked me straight in the eye and said, "You know Mom and Dad only keep you around because they felt sorry for you, right?" "If you weren't here, nothing would change," I didn't reply. I just went to my room and cried into my pillow, too ashamed to tell anyone what he'd said. But the silence of those years taught me something important. Cruelty thrives when no one calls it out. And in my family, no one ever did. If my brother mocked me, my father would chuckle. If he excluded me, my sisters would look away. If I protested, my mother would say, "Don't take him so seriously. He's just joking." Except it was never a joke. By the time we were teenagers, the favoritism had hardened into something unspoken but undeniable. He was the golden child. I was the shadow, and yet I wanted so badly to belong. I studied harder, thinking maybe achievement would earn me a place. I offered to help my mother with chores, to prove my worth. I gave up my allowance when my brother wanted new sneakers, thinking maybe sacrifice would make them see me as family. It didn't. Instead, it taught him that I was easy to use. By the time we were adults, that dynamic hadn't changed. He borrowed money constantly, promising to pay it back, but never did. He mocked me in front of friends, calling me the charity case. And through it all, my parents stayed silent. If I tried to bring it up, they brushed it aside. "He's just stressed. Don't hold grudges. Your family. That word was always used as a leash. To pull me back when I wanted to protest. To remind me that I should be grateful for even being there at all. I carried that weight into every gathering. Birthdays, holidays, dinners. Always trying to fit myself into a place that was never built for me. And yet, despite all of it, I still hoped. I still hoped that maybe one day they'd see me differently. Not as the adopted one, not as the outsider, not as the guest at their table. Maybe one day I'd sit among them and feel like I belonged. So when the invitation came for that dinner, I wanted to believe it was different this time. The message in the family group chat said, "Let's all meet up. It's been too long. Everyone should come, no excuses. Everyone." For a moment, I let myself think maybe the years had changed something. Maybe we were older, wiser, ready to put aside the old wounds. But deep down, a voice inside me whispered, "Be careful, because cruelty doesn't always fade with time. Sometimes, it just grows quieter, waiting for its chance to erupt again." And that night at the restaurant, when my brother told me to go find another table, I realized something. He hadn't changed. None of them had. They were just waiting for the right moment to remind me of the truth I had always known, that in their eyes, I never really belonged at all. By the time I reached adulthood, I had stopped expecting fairness. I had built my life on the edges of theirs, carving out a small place where I could survive without needing much from anyone. I worked hard, earned scholarships, pushed myself through school, and when I finally got my first job, I promised myself one thing. I would never rely on my family for money or stability. But of course, the same rule didn't apply in the other direction. My brother, the golden one, grew into a man who carried his childhood entitlement like a crown. He lived recklessly, spent more than he earned, and expected everyone else to clean up the mess. And more often than not, that someone was me. He would call late at night, his voice slurred, asking for a quick loan. 200 here, 500 there. Always urgent, always temporary. He promised to pay me back each time, and each time the money vanished, the debt forgotten. The first few times, I convinced myself I was doing the right thing. That maybe helping him would prove my worth. That maybe he'd see me as more than the outsider. But every loan only made him bolder. I still remember one night when he showed up at my apartment uninvited. He looked around the small place I had built for myself, clean, modest, but mine, and laughed. "Funny," he said. "You don't even belong to us, but somehow you're doing better than me." Doesn't seem fair, does it? Fair. That word burned in my chest. But I swallowed my anger and handed him another envelope of cash, because that's what I'd been trained to do. Every smaller humiliation prepared the ground for the larger one that was coming. And it wasn't just about money at family gatherings. He'd exclude me from photos, making jokes about how the family picture would look better without me. At weddings, he'd assign me menial tasks, fetching drinks, watching coats, while everyone else danced. When I tried to talk to my parents, they dismissed it every time. "Don't take him seriously. He's just joking. You're family. You need to let things go." But I knew what it really meant. My feelings weren't worth protecting. The silence of the others became its own betrayal. And so the years passed. Every insult stacking like bricks. Every debt unpaid like interest compounding on a balance I never agreed to hold. Until finally, the invitation to dinner came. It arrived in the family group chat. Cheerful, casual. We should all meet up. Big dinner on Saturday. Everyone come. At first, I hesitated. I thought about the last birthday party I'd attended, where my brother had raised a toast to the real children, while everyone laughed uncomfortably and pretended it was just humor. I thought about Christmas, when my sisters exchanged matching bracelets while my gift, a clearance candle, still sat unopened in a corner. Why would this time be different? And yet some foolish part of me hoped, maybe we were older now. Maybe the sharp edges of youth had softened. Maybe finally the word family could mean what I had always wanted it to mean. So I said yes. That Saturday, I dressed carefully, not too fancy, not too plain. I wanted to show respect, but not look like I was trying too hard. I told myself this was a chance to prove I belonged at that table. But the signs began almost as soon as I arrived. My brother greeted everyone with hugs, backslaps, and laughter. When I reached out, he gave me a half-hearted pat, already turning to the next sibling. The conversation flowed around me like I wasn't there. Inside jokes, shared memories, whispers I wasn't invited into. I tried to contribute. I mentioned a promotion at work. Silence. My sister mentioned her weekend trip. Applause, questions, admiration. I smiled, nodded, forced myself to laugh when expected. But underneath, the old ache was there. That familiar knowledge. I was tolerated, not included. As the night went on, the wine flowed freely. My brother ordered bottle after bottle, waving the waiter over with dramatic flair. He ordered appetizers we didn't need, desserts no one finished, cocktails with names I couldn't pronounce. I felt a knot form in my stomach. I wasn't naive. I knew who would be blamed for this indulgence. I had seen it before, his extravagance, followed by excuses, followed by my quiet bailout. Still, I stayed, because some part of me still wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, tonight would be different. But by the time the entrees arrived, I should have known better. He leaned across the table, his grin slick with wine, and said the words I'll never forget. "Why don't you go find another table? You don't belong here." The laughter that followed wasn't loud. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. Enough to remind me of every whispered insult, every smaller betrayal, every moment when I had been told, silently or aloud, that I was not one of them. And when the waiter placed the bill in front of me, with its obscene total, 370 teens, it wasn't just a number. It was the sum of every unpaid debt, every insult, every wound that had been brushed aside as a joke. It was years of cruelty, neatly printed on a piece of paper. And as I stared at that bill, feeling the weight of their eyes, their laughter, their silence, I realized something I had never allowed myself to accept before. This wasn't about one dinner. This was about a lifetime. And the lifetime was about to end. The check sat in front of me like a weapon. The black leather folder, the neatly folded paper inside, the bold numbers at the bottom, 3,270.14, staring back at me like an accusation. For a long moment, no one spoke. I could feel the heat of their stares pressing against my skin. My sisters pretending to sip their drinks, my mother adjusting her necklace, my father looking down at his phone as though the glowing screen could hide his cowardice. And then, my brother leaned back in his chair, folded his arms, and smirked. "Well?" he asked, his voice slick with amusement. "Better get your card out." "You know how this works," the table rippled with low laughter. Not from everyone, but enough. Enough to confirm that this wasn't spontaneous. It was planned. A performance. He wanted to humiliate me, and the others? They were willing to play their parts. My throat felt tight, but I kept my expression still. I lowered my eyes to the bill again, tracing each line of the itemized list. The bottles of wine, the double desserts, the extravagant entrees, not one of them mine. It was all his, but he wanted me to pay for it. Just like always. A memory flickered in my mind. The time he took my allowance as a teenager, claiming he'd pay me back, and laughed when I asked for it weeks later. Another memory, him borrowing rent money from me in college while sneering that my apartment was too good for someone like me. This wasn't new. It was simply louder now. Bolder, with an audience. I let the silence stretch. Seconds ticked by, heavy and deliberate. My brother's smirk faltered just slightly. "What's the matter?" he asked, leaning forward. "Too expensive for you? Don't worry, you'll get used to it. Family dinners aren't cheap." Family. That word again. A word they only used when it meant my sacrifice, their benefit. I looked up slowly. My eyes met his, and in that moment I stopped feeling afraid because I realized something powerful. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not my money, not my silence, not even my presence at that table. I exhaled, calm, controlled. And then, very softly, I spoke. One day you'll wish I wasn't family. The words cut through the air like a blade. The table went silent. Even the waiter, still hovering nearby, froze in place. My brother's grin faltered. For the first time all night, uncertainty flickered in his eyes. He tried to laugh it off. What's that supposed to mean? But my calmness unnerved him, because he expected me to shout, to cry, to storm out in a fit of anger. He expected me to play the role I'd always played, the powerless one. Instead, I had given him something he didn't know how to handle, a sentence he couldn't twist into a joke, a promise he couldn't shake off. I didn't say another word. I didn't explain. Didn't justify, didn't beg anyone else at the table to defend me. I simply slid the check back toward the waiter and said, "You can bring this to the person who ordered it." The waiter hesitated, glancing between me and my brother. But I didn't break eye contact. My voice was steady, final, and in that moment, the performance collapsed. My father cleared his throat, muttered something about handling it. My mother pressed her lips together, her hands fidgeting with her wine glass. My sisters avoided my eyes, but my brother, his smirk was gone. He leaned back, jaw tight, staring at me as though he'd never seen me before. The tension hung heavy, almost suffocating. Then slowly, I pushed my chair back. The legs scraped against the polished floor with a sound that made several heads turn from nearby tables. I stood. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't plead for fairness. I simply gathered my coat, laid my napkin gently on the table, and walked away. Every step toward the exit was measured, deliberate. I felt their eyes burning into my back, but I didn't look back. When I reached the door, I paused just long enough to glance at the reflection in the restaurant's glass pane. My brother's face was pale, his smirk erased. The others sat stiff, their laughter gone. I left them there, with their expensive meal, their unpaid bill, and the weight of my words echoing in the silence I left behind. One day, you'll wish I wasn't family. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't revenge. It was the truth. Because from that moment forward, the balance had shifted. They could no longer dismiss me as the powerless one. And they would soon learn that cutting me out came with consequences they had never imagined. The next morning, my phone was flooded, not with apologies, not with concern, not even with the faintest acknowledgement that what had happened was wrong. Instead, there were messages from relatives, acquaintances, and even distant family friends. Why did you embarrass your brother like that? You were so dramatic last night. You shouldn't have made a scene. You're tearing the family apart. I scrolled slowly, letting each message sink in. The pattern was clear. They weren't defending him. They were trying to rewrite history, to make me the villain. It was almost laughable if it weren't so exhausting. My brother, of course, was silent, but I knew him too well. The silence wasn't remorse. It was anger, a simmering, festering rage at having been exposed in front of everyone. He wanted the power he'd always held, the ability to humiliate, to mock, to erase me, but for the first time, he didn't have it. I spent the morning looking over the bill again. 32s and 70-14ers, it wasn't just a number. It was a symbol, a culmination of every insult, every debt, every act of exclusion. I realized that confronting it at the dinner had done something important. It had removed the illusion that I was powerless, but I didn't stop there. Over the next few days, I gathered evidence, bank statements, old messages, photos of the gifts I'd received versus theirs, screenshots of every time my brother had borrowed money and never repaid. I documented every small betrayal, every insult, every act of exclusion. I knew they would try to twist the story. I knew they would spin it, paint me as dramatic or vindictive, and I wanted them to fail. So I created a timeline. I showed friends, family outside the household, and even a few distant cousins the full picture of how I had been treated. The financial exploitation, the verbal humiliation, the constant reminders that I was less than because I wasn't born into the family. People listened, people understood. The reactions were quiet at first, but gradually my truth spread. The story of the $3,270 dinner bill became more than a shocking anecdote. It became proof of a pattern. My brother's reputation started to falter. The people who had once laughed at my expense now looked at him differently. He realized that while he had spent years building an image of entitlement and dominance, it was fragile. It had cracks. And I had found them. And me? I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, I had carried the weight of being the outsider, the adopted one, the one who didn't belong, the one who always had to prove themselves, only to be reminded that blood mattered more than effort, presence, or love. But walking away from that table, refusing to pay that bill, and delivering those few calm words had changed everything. I wasn't powerless, I wasn't small, I wasn't the charity case, the shadow, or the afterthought. I was someone who had survived years of subtle cruelty, who had endured exclusion and exploitation, and who had finally claimed their own dignity. It wasn't about revenge. It was about recognition. I chose distance. I chose peace. I chose a life where respect wasn't something I had to beg for. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged. Somewhere real. Somewhere that valued me for who I was. Not where I came from. The family didn't change overnight. Some never did. But their opinions no longer mattered. I had a truth that couldn't be erased. A calm certainty that I had survived the toxicity, and I had emerged stronger. And that's the lesson I carry with me, even today. Family doesn't always protect you. Sometimes it hurts you. Sometimes it teaches you how to stand on your own. When my brother told me to find another table, he thought he was punishing me. In reality, he was teaching me the one lesson he could never give in kindness, how to finally sit at my own table. Now, I choose who sits with me and who doesn't. And I choose peace over chaos, recognition over humiliation, calm over conflict, because I learned the truth. Belonging isn't given. It's claimed. And as I reflect on that night, I can't help but wonder, what would you have done if you were in my place? Would you have paid the bill? Would you have shouted? Would you have walked away quietly, letting your words do the work? Or would you have found your own table and refused to return? The choice defines us, and I finally know the one I had to make.